Hi, my name is Nanda Houston, and we're continuing our walk through the book of Esther. I believe that Esther has some critical things that we can learn, blueprints and strategies that were specific to her, but certain ways that she went about her life in the middle of going from tragedy to triumph. Her story is remarkable and extreme. And so if God can use Esther, surely God can use us. I'm believing for that today. We're going to talk right now about the element that I believe she grasped onto, and that was finding her voice. So of all the truths and the wisdom that we are discovering from the book of Esther, I think this is probably the most critical. This is a crossroads for us as believers to find our voice. As we've talked about, some other things that Esther has brought forth and brought to the forefront of her story is that she activated her trust with God and she embraced her assignment. Those two things were probably around the same time when she said, I've been brought to the kingdom. The Jews were going to be annihilated. She had favor with God and came into the kingdom and became the queen of Persia. And they did not know that she was a Jew, but here she is, an insider, been brought to this very prestigious and affluential and a place of authority. And here she is in this place, and God is saying, Esther, I put you here for a reason, not just because of maybe that your needs are going to be met or that you get to wear some royal robes. So she came to trust God and to embrace the assignment. She recognized, she said, maybe I've been brought to the Mordecai, her cousin, said, maybe you've been brought to the kingdom for this time. And she said, yes, I think so, Mordecai. I think so, Lord. And she says, if I perish, I perish. But right after that, she calls her women, the women in the palace, and she calls others to a fast. Mordecai's out in the streets with sackcloth and ash, and he's fasting. The Jews are going to be annihilated, and they need an intervention from God. There's no backup here. There's no way that they can help their own story. There's nothing that can happen that they can do in the physical. It's all on God, or it's not going to happen. And I think that's a place that, in today's age, that we can relate to as well. That hasn't changed. We are mere humans, and God knows that. And many times through our life, we come into these situations where we say, I'm backed up to a wall. I'm against a rock and a hard spot. I have tried all the things, and now I'm out, and I just stand here, God, trusting you. I think that is a place of strength, a place of surrender, a place of engagement with God, where you're activating your trust, where you're saying, God, I'm willing, I'll do something. In the meantime, what I'm doing is praying, and I'm in the Word, and I'm positioning my heart to hear from the Lord. Critical time. That's what Esther did. That's how she called people to fasting, and fasting goes along with prayer. The two go hand in hand. They were saying, the answer is not in my flesh. That's what fasting does. I know that I don't have it in my own, and I am tuning in to hear what the Spirit is saying. That's what fasting is about, and that's what she did. And during that time, then they get up from the fast, and she says, you know what? I'm going to put on my royal robes. She has a strategy. She got a plan. She says, I'm going to put on my royal robes, and I am going to go into the king's palace, into the courts of the king, where she could be executed on the spot. On the spot. She had to be summoned. People who came in to see the king need to have a summons, and she did not have that. So she knew that she was risking her life as she walked into that place to talk with her husband, the king. He sees her walk in, and he says, Esther, oh, what do you want? I'll give you half of the kingdom, up to half of the kingdom. What do you want? She had, again, the favor of the king was on her, and she asks him to dinner. That's the big plan. Isn't that great? I think sometimes God tells us to do the simplest of things. I think that sometimes we can miss a lot by just going, oh, that seems silly. The Bible is filled with stories where kings had to dip in the river 7 times, Naaman did, where there's silly things that happened, where Jesus spit in the mud and did these. What is all that about? It's whatever the moment that God is trying to speak and minister and teach us in a new way. And I believe that we don't get formula-based, that we don't get program-based, that we say, oh, we plug and play. Whatever Esther did, I'm going to do that. We can extract truth, but we have to apply it to our own life, and God has our own journey in our own unique situation. And it doesn't look like anybody else's. And the faster we learn that, the better we are. What Esther did at that moment was she had to find her voice. As I'm losing mine. She had to find her voice. She had to get courage to go then do what God had told her to do. There were action steps. She says, Lord, I'm trusting you. I've activated my faith. I've embraced this moment and know that you want to use me. In a way, those are kind of the easy things in comparison with finding your voice. Finding your voice is when you tune out the other voices. I'm sure in Esther's, in this time of praying and fasting, that she had to wrestle with, and I believe we all do, her own voice. Her own voice is saying, who are you? Her own voice is saying, you were born out there, and you're an orphan, and you belong to Mordecai's family, and somehow you got into this place. Who are you to be a part of God's bigger plan? Our own voice can sometimes abort what God wants to do. So we have to get over our own self, and I think Esther, she did that. She had the voice of the king, who was partial to her and complimentary, but she did not know that until she stepped out. She didn't know if when she said, I need to come, have a moment with you, king, she could have been executed on the spot. She didn't know what was going on in the king's mind and through his voice. She did know what was going on in Haman, and Haman was the arch enemy of the Jews. He's the one who came up with the plan to say, I'm going to annihilate, and he hated Mordecai so much. He said, I'm not just going to take you out. He helped the king to arrive at this verdict to annihilate all the Jews. That's how much his hatred towards him was. And there's an enemy of our soul that hates us that much. And that voice is belittling you and saying, who do you think you are? I know who you are. The accuser of the brethren, the father of lies, the author of fear, that is what the enemy does. That's the language that he speaks. That is the voice the enemy speaks, and we need to know that because we have to differentiate between our own voice, outside voices, the voice of the enemy, and then there was another voice in Esther's life, and that was the voice of Mordecai. Mordecai is a sage. He's a voice of wisdom. He's a voice of the Holy Spirit who challenged her and just didn't say, Esther, go ahead, do what you want. You're in there. God bless you, my child, right? Because she was in his household and raised as his daughter. Go ahead, yes, save yourself. And I know God's going to provide for us. But he was in tune enough to know. And there's people that we can bring into our life, we need in our life as trusted mentors, as trusted leaders, as trusted coaches, whatever you want to call it, who have the authority, not everybody does, to speak truth to us, to challenge us, and to say, is God really saying that? Esther, are you sure you weren't brought to the kingdom for this time to be part of a bigger solution? Are you sure you're not just supposed to save yourself, but that God doesn't have a plan to save all the Jews because of your position? This is a critical moment that Esther was at, and I believe the same is true for us. We hear the competing voices of opposition. We hear the competing voices of those who doubt. And let me tell you, when you step out and embrace your assignment and you're trusting God and you're trying to find your voice, let me tell you, the opposition will be there to say, who are you? And to make you speak some words to help you doubt yourself as well. There's all of that we have to field. And it's not the voice that you hear, my friend. It's not those outside voices that you hear. It is the voice that you listen to. The voice that you listen to. Just because you're hearing things doesn't mean that you're fleshy, that you're not mature. In fact, I believe probably the more mature that we get, maybe the opposition even gets greater in some instances. I think that we have to differentiate and say, oh, I hear you, enemy. Oh, I hear you, maybe like Job's friends. Thanks a lot for all your encouragement. We don't have to, by the way, we don't have to say this to them. We're saying it inside going, they have no permission to speak to me. Enemy, you have no right to advise me. Opposition, you have no right to advise me. Hey, trusted mentor, sage, Mordecai, what are you thinking? She engaged with a dialogue. And he's outside the palace. So if you read in the book of Esther, it says that they would send word to Mordecai. Mordecai would send word. It was a big deal. It wasn't just pick up the phone and have a little conversation. There was some intentionality in that moment that she had to seek, and she didn't get offended. She didn't get offended that at that moment when he challenged her, she could have said, you know what, I find that offensive, and and shut him down. She embraced it, and she considered it. And I believe she probably had to chew on that and pray about it, but she'd already been in a place and positioned her heart to hear from the Lord by praying and fasting. She already had that. So sometimes at that right moment when you've prepared yourself well, suddenly moments happen, and it seems like that's what happened with Esther. She had a suddenly moment. She goes, suddenly I know what to do. She didn't know what to do before. Now I know what to do. And when you know what to do, that's huge. Now, you don't know the whole thing, by the way. God never reveals the whole picture. It is one step at a time. So if you're waiting for that marquee down the street to light up with the will of God, that's not the way it happens. And it's not easy for anybody. We have to stay devoted and stay engaged and stay abiding, like John 15 says, abiding in God, in that communion. And it's not that relationship that is because I want to go in and be close to God because I need something. I need to go in because I want something. I need to go in. Now, we do that, but really the heart of God is that he's after you. He's after me. And in the middle of all of this, in the middle of it, which is crazy, but I believe it's my experience, and I believe it's the experience of others too, that we can draw closer to God in those times because we do press in, and God is there to meet us every time. It's not the voice that you hear, remember, it's the voice that you listen to. Who you hear and is influencing your voice, so we need to be careful about the voices that we're listening to. It's like, I believe another example in the Bible is Isaiah, where he comes in to the temple, he has an encounter with the holy living God, and he says, who am I? And I believe that is an example of all of us. We say, who am I? And the answer is really not much. Of course, we're God's sons and daughters. We're cherished and valued and loved. But in those crisis moments, we say, who am I? Because I don't have it within me. And God says, yeah, I know. Perfect. Now you've gotten to the end of you, so now you can reach out to me. Who am I? And then Isaiah has an aha moment because he sees the grandeur and the glory and the holiness of God. And he says, I want to be a part of this. They said, who's going to go for us? This is what the conversation that the Lord is having. And Isaiah says, here, I'll go. And that is what God is looking for. It's not the ones who are so perfect and put together all the time. It's the available. Who is available? That's who God uses, those who are available. Instead of the here am I, the who am I, it goes from who am I to here am I, send me. You have unique experiences that are unique to yourself and nobody else, and that's why it's a very individual journey. Esther's journey didn't look like anybody else, and no one else in the Bible, no one else on the planet, because God has uniquely designed you. Your voice, though, is important, and you need to find that in the middle of a crisis or especially a critical moment. We need to find our voice anyway, but especially in those moments, because the voice is the vehicle that's going to help us execute, to walk out the will of God, to walk out and execute the assignment. We have to find our voice in the middle of it. And like I said before, we can abort the plan of God because we don't want to stand up and find our voice. You don't have to be an extrovert. It's not about that, an introvert or an extrovert. It's about knowing who you are in Christ. And when you know what you know, that I know in some certain instances. When I know that gives me the courage and the voice to be able to walk out a next step. And it's one step at a time, one day at a time. It gives me direction to pray when I find my voice, because now I know the direction that I'm praying. Now I know that I'm saying, I'm going this way. And so you pray into it better. It gives us the ability to speak into from the darkness to the light. I can speak into that when I find my voice. And it reminds you that you have a greater mission when you find your voice, that you are about your Father's business. Esther was about her Father's business. She had everything on the line. She totally did. It could have gone bad, but she trusted God. She embraced her assignment. She found her voice, and she trusted God during it all, one step at a time. So find your voice and let it be the megaphone that God uses to tell the whole world about the good news. It's important to find your voice today.